Hi, welcome to Midnight Whisper Stories, where every night hides a new nightmare. I am the creator behind this channel, and every story he is written, designed, and edited by me. I make these tales to give you chills, escape, and a reason to keep the lights on. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends.
Story 1. Evidence room there. As a gun in the Kenai Police Department evidence room that has been frozen solid for 17 years. And last Tuesday night, I heard it whisper my name. Not through a speaker, not through the walls. The gun itself was speaking, frost crackling off the barrel with each syllable, forming words in the air like breath on a winter morning. My name is James Garrett. I've been a police officer in Kenai, Alaska for 19 years. I've seen murders, suicides, disappearances that never got solved. The bagged evidence that sits in our storage room gathering dust while families wait for answers that never come. But I never believed the stories about the evidence room until I worked the graveyard shift alone and learned that some crimes are so violent, so filled with rage and fear, that they leave an imprint on the objects involved. A stain that doesn't wash off. A cold that never thaws. The evidence room is in the basement. Climate controlled. Steady 68 degrees year-round, humidity monitored, everything cataloged and stored according to protocol. It is a concrete box with fluorescent lights and metal shelving units holding banker S boxes and plastic evidence bags. Nothing special, nothing unusual, except for the frost. It started showing up about 15 years ago. Officers would go downstairs to retrieve evidence for court cases and find certain items covered in ice. Not all of them, just specific pieces, usually weapons, guns, knives, a tire iron from a hit and run, a baseball bat used in an assault. The items were always connected to unsolved cases. Crimes where we never found the perpetrator, where victims died without justice. The department brought in HVAC specialists. They checked the climate control system, inspected the ductwork, searched for cold air leaks. Found nothing wrong. The room maintained perfect temperature. But the frost kept appearing. Thick, white, spreading across metal and wood like a living thing. Officers started avoiding the evidence room. They send the newest rookies down there. Make jokes about the ghost freeze. Pretend it was just a quirky malfunction. But I saw the way their hands shook when they came back upstairs carrying a frosted evidence bag. I heard them talking in the break room about the sounds, the whispers, the feeling of being watched by empty boxes and sealed plastic. I thought they were being dramatic, letting ghost stories get into their heads. Until December 3rd, when I pulled the overnight shift and Sergeant Holloway asked me to retrieve case file 2007-142 from the evidence room. I went downstairs at 2:15 a.m. The basement was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I unlocked the evidence room door and stepped inside. The temperature felt normal at first, but as I walked between the shelving units, looking for the right box, I noticed my breath starting to fog. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. I found case 2007-142 on the third shelf. The box was covered in frost, thick enough that I couldn't read the label underneath. I reached out to grab it and jerked my hand back. The cardboard was freezing. Not cold, actually frozen, like it had been sitting in a deep freezer for hours. That's when I heard the first whisper. Help me. I spun around. Nobody there. Just rows of shelves and boxes and the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. I stood perfectly still, listening. The whisper came again, softer this time, desperate. Please, help me. It was coming from my left, from a shelf holding evidence bags. I walked over slowly. 5 bags were lined up, each containing a weapon. A revolver, a hunting knife, a box cutter, a length of rope, a hammer. All of them covered in frost so thick the plastic bags looked like they had been dipped in snow. The revolver was moving. Not much, just a slight trembling. The frost on the barrel was vibrating, sending tiny ice crystals falling into the bag. And the whisper was coming from it. I could see the words forming in the frozen air above the bag. Letters made of condensation, spelling out, help me find him. Case 2007-142 was a homicide. A woman named Rebecca Marsh, 34 years old, shot 3 times in her apartment. We found her 2 days after she died. Her 6-year-old daughter had been staying with neighbors, too scared to tell anyone her mother wasn't coming home. The murder weapon was a .38 revolver. We recovered it from a dumpster 3 blocks away. No prints, no DNA, no leads. The case went cold after 6 months. That gun was in the evidence bag in front of me, and it was trying to communicate. I backed away from the shelf. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed the case file box, frost and all, and got out of that room as fast as I could. I locked the door behind me, stood in the hallway, tried to convince myself I imagined it. Stress, fatigue, too many overnight shifts. But when I opened the case file upstairs, I found something that made my hands start shaking. Tucked between the crime scene photos and witness statements was a note. Not an official document, a handwritten note on lined paper. The handwriting was small and shaky. Child's handwriting. The note said, "The man who hurt Mommy has a dog named Max and he drives a blue truck and he smells like cigarettes and he told Mommy he loved her but he was lying." Rebecca's daughter had written it. Probably days or weeks after the murder. Someone had put it in the case file and forgotten about it. Or maybe they hadn't forgotten. Maybe they dismissed it as a traumatized child, as confused memory. But that note contained details we never followed up on. Specific details. A blue truck, a dog named Max, a man who claimed to love Rebecca. I spent the rest of my shift going through the original investigation files, looking for any mention of a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend with a blue truck and a dog. Found nothing. The detectives had focused on other angles. Robbery, random violence. They never seriously considered someone close to Rebecca. At 6 a.m., when my shift ended, I went back to the evidence room. The door was still locked, but I could hear sounds coming from inside. Not whispers this time. Banging. Metallic banging, like someone hitting the shelving units, like someone trying to get my attention. I opened the door. The evidence room was a freezer. My breath came out in thick white clouds. Frost covered everything, not just the weapons anymore. Every box, every shelf, every inch of the walls and floor. The temperature had to be below zero. And in the center of the room, on the floor, were words written in frost. Michael Torres, 847 Spruce Lane, Blue Dodge Ram Max. I took a photo with my phone. Locked the door, went upstairs and ran the name through our database. Michael Torres, 41 years old, 2 prior domestic violence arrests. Restraining order filed by a former girlfriend in 2005. Address, 847 Spruce Lane. I drove to the address. A small house on the edge of town. A blue Dodge Ram in the driveway. A dog barking in the backyard. I could see the name on the doghouse. Max. I called for backup. We brought Michael Torres in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. Said he barely knew Rebecca Marsh. But when we showed him the ballistics report from the .38 revolver, when we told him we had new evidence, he broke down. Confessed. He'd been in a relationship with Rebecca. She tried to end it. He'd gone to her apartment. They argued. He shot her 3 times. Dumped the gun. Thought he'd gotten away with it. We arrested him. Charged him. The case that had been cold for 17 years was finally closed. Rebecca's daughter, now 23 years old, got the call that her mother's killer had been found. She cried. Said she'd always known. Said she tried to tell people. But nobody had listened to a scared 6-year-old girl. I thought that would be the end of it. Case solved. The evidence room would go back to normal. The frost would disappear. It got worse. I went back to the evidence room 2 days after the arrest. The frost was gone from Rebecca's case evidence. The .38 revolver sat in its bag at room temperature. Normal. Silent. But now there were 17 other items covered in frost. 17 other weapons from 17 other unsolved cases. And they were all whispering. Different voices. Different words. But all of them pleading. All of them begging for help. For justice. For someone to finally listen. I spent the last 3 weeks going through cold cases. Following the clues that appear in the frost. Names written on frozen metal. Addresses spelled out in ice crystals. Details that were overlooked or dismissed during the original investigations. And every single lead has been solid. Every single whisper has pointed toward the truth. We reopened 8 cases so far. Made 3 arrests. Identified 4 suspects who died before we could charge them. Brought closure to families who've been waiting decades for answers. But the frost keeps spreading. More items freeze every night. More voices join the chorus. The evidence room is a freezer now. They had to seal it off. Only I go in there anymore. The other officers refuse. They say the whispers are getting louder. More insistent. Almost angry. Last night, I found frost on a case from 1987. A double homicide. A couple shot in their home. No suspects. No leads. The murder weapon was never recovered. But on the metal shelf holding their case file, written in thick ice, were GPS coordinates. I followed them. They led to a section of forest outside Kenai. I brought a cadaver dog and a digging team. We found a .45 pistol buried 3 feet down, wrapped in plastic, preserved. We're running ballistics now. The thing that terrifies me, ISN, the impossible cold. Isn't the voices. Isn't even the fact that dead victims are somehow communicating through frozen evidence. It's the realization that they've been failing them. All these years, all these unsolved cases, these people died violent, terrifying deaths, and we gave up on them. Filed their cases away, let their killers walk free, and their rage, their need for justice, was so powerful that it literally froze itself into the evidence. Became something permanent, something that refuses to be ignored. Do you know how long this will continue? There are hundreds of unsolved cases in that evidence room. Hundreds of voices waiting to be heard. Every night, more frost appears. More whispers echo through the basement. More names and addresses and details materialize in the ice. I am working through them as fast as I can, following every lead, reopening every case. But I'm just one person, and the voices are getting impatient. 2 nights ago, I heard my name whispered in the evidence room. Not by a victim, by something else. Something that exists in that impossible cold. Something that's using the victim's need for justice to manifest itself. It told me I have 6 months. 6 months to solve every case in that room. Every frozen whisper, every iced-over weapon. It didn't say what would happen after 6 months. But the temperature in the evidence room has been dropping 1 degree every night. It is at -15 now. The frost is spreading beyond the room, into the hallway, up the stairs. Yesterday, I found ice crystals forming on my desk, on my keyboard, on my badge. The cold is following me home. I wake up in the middle of the night to find frost on my bedroom window. My breath fogging even though the heat is running, and then the condensation on the glass. I see words forming. Case numbers, names, addresses. The evidence room has claimed me, made me its instrument. I am not investigating cold cases anymore. I am being used by them, driven by them. The whispers follow me everywhere now. In my car, in the shower, in every quiet moment, a chorus of the dead demanding justice. So here is my question for you. If you were a cop and you discovered that murder victims could speak through evidence, that they could reach across death itself to name their killers, would you listen? Would you dedicate yourself to giving them justice? Or would you walk away, knowing that some doors, once opened, consume everyone who steps through them? Think carefully before you answer, because the cold is spreading, and it is hungry, and it is looking for anyone willing to hear the voices of the dead. Maybe it has already found you. Story 2. Harbor Master, this warning, have you ever seen someone standing outside your window at 3 in the morning, completely drenched in freezing water, pointing towards something you can see? Not knocking, not moving, just standing there in the rain, water pouring off them like they just crawled out of the ocean. Their arm extended toward the darkness, warning you about something that hasn't happened yet. I am telling you this because it happened to me 5 nights ago in Ketchikan, Alaska, and I need someone to understand what I saw before the storm comes back. My name is Robert Chen. I am a 52-year-old accountant. I moved to Ketchikan 3 years ago for a quieter life after my divorce. I am not superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts, or I didn't. Not until I learned that some warnings come from the dead, and ignoring them costs more than you can imagine. The figure appeared on November 4th during one of those brutal southeast Alaska storms where the rain doesn't fall so much as a tack. Horizontal sheets of water driven by wind that howls through the harbor like a wounded animal. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep because of the storm, when I saw movement outside my bedroom window. A person, standing in my backyard, completely still despite the wind and rain hammering everything else. They were facing my house, facing me. Even from 20 feet away, I could see water pouring off them. Not rain, this was different, thicker, like they were melting, like their entire body was made of ice-cold seawater that was constantly streaming off them onto the grass. They raised one arm, pointed past my house, toward the harbor. The gesture was deliberate, urgent. Then they just stood there, arm extended, water pooling around their feet. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aimed it out the window. The beam caught them fully. I wish it hadn't. I wish I just called the police and stated that. Because what I saw in that light wasn't human. Not anymore. The figure was a man, middle-aged, wearing what looked like a captain's jacket and rain gear from decades ago. But his skin was gray, bloated, His eyes were white, filmed over like a dead fish. His mouth hung open, and water poured from it in a steady stream. Not dripping, pouring, like his lungs were full of ocean and it was constantly draining out. He stood there for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, still pointing toward the harbor. Then he turned and walked away. Not hurried, just a slow, purposeful walk toward the tree line at the edge of my property. I watched him disappear into the darkness, leaving a trail of water that the rain couldn't to wash away fast enough. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At sunrise, I went outside to look for footprints or evidence. Found nothing. The grass where he'd been standing was dead, brown, like it had been soaked in salt water and killed overnight. I asked my neighbor, old Frank Morrison, if he'd seen anyone in the area. Frank has lived in Ketchikan for 40 years, fishes commercially, knows every story and legend in this town. When I described what I'd seen, his face went pale. He told me about the harbor master, Edmund Vickers, ran the Ketchikan harbor from 1967 to 1983. Edmund was obsessive about safety, checked weather reports constantly, warned fishermen about dangerous conditions, delayed departures if storms were coming, saved dozens of lives over his career by being cautious, paranoid, some said. On March 15, 1983, Edmund warned a fishing crew about an incoming storm. Severe conditions, dangerous seas, but the crew had bills to pay, families to feed. They went out anyway. The boat was called the North Star. 5 men aboard. The storm hit harder than predicted. The North Star sent a distress call at 11:47 p.m. Coast Guard launched a rescue operation but couldn't to reach them in time. The boat capsized. All 5 men drowned. Their bodies were recovered over the next week, washed up on beaches around Ketchikan. Edmund blamed himself, fell into a depression, started drinking. 3 months later, on June 8th, he walked into the harbor during another storm. Witnesses saw him walk straight into the water. Fully clothed, he didn't try to swim. Just walked until the water was over his head and disappeared. They found his body 2 days later. Bloated, gray, pulled from the harbor wearing his captain's jacket and rain gear. After Edmund died, fishermen started reporting sightings. A figure outside their homes before major storms. Always drenched, always pointing toward the harbor, always warning them. The old-timers called him the harbor master, his ghost. Most people dismissed it as legend, superstition, the kind of story fishermen tell to pass time. But Frank looked at me with absolute seriousness and said if I'd seen Edmund, a bad storm was coming. Worse than anything predicted, and I needed to prepare or get out of town. I checked the weather forecast. Nothing unusual. Rain, sure. But Ketchikan always has rain. No severe weather warnings. No storm advisories. I convinced myself Frank was feeding me ghost stories. That what I'd seen was a confused homeless person or a prank. The figure appeared again the next night. Same time, same place, but closer. Now he was only 10 feet from my window. Water streaming off him in rivers. His dead white eyes staring directly at me. His arm pointing toward the harbor with even more urgency. I noticed something new. His mouth was moving, like he was trying to speak. No sound came out, just water pouring from his lips. But I could read the words forming. Over and over. Leave. Now. Leave. I drew my curtains and backed away from the window. Told myself I was having a nervous breakdown. Stress-induced hallucinations. But when I peeked through the curtains an hour later, he was still there. Standing in the rain, pointing, warning. This happened 3 nights in a row. Each night, Edmund was closer. By the 4th night, he was pressed against my window. His bloated gray face inches from the glass. Water streaming down the window so thick I could barely see his features through it. His mouth moving frantically. Leave, leave, leave. The weather forecast still showed nothing unusual. But I started noticing other things. The seagulls were gone. Ketchikan always has seagulls. Thousands of them. But the skies were empty. The harbor seals had disappeared too. The docks where they usually lounged were vacant. I talked to other fishermen at the harbor. Asked if they noticed anything strange. Most dismissed me. But one old-timer, a woman named Patricia who'd been fishing since the 70s, pulled me aside. She'd seen Edmund too. 3 nights ago, outside her house, pointing toward the harbor. She was taking her boat out of the water, moving it to high ground. She suggested I leave town for a few days. I started packing that afternoon. But I made a mistake. I waited until morning to leave. I thought I had time. Edmund appeared at 2 a.m. Not outside anymore. Inside my house. I woke up to the sound of water dripping. Opened my eyes. He was standing at the foot of my bed. Water pooling around his feet. Soaking into my carpet. his dead eyes fixed on me, his mouth hanging open, ocean water pouring out in a steady stream onto my floor. He raised his arm, pointing toward the window, toward the harbor, and for the first time, I heard his voice, wet, gurgling, like he was speaking through lungs full of seawater. Tonight, the wave comes tonight, get to high ground. Then he turned and walked through my bedroom wall, literally through it, leaving a trail of water that seeped into the drywall and disappeared. I didn't T-pack. I grabbed my keys and drove straight up the mountain road toward the high ground above town. It was 2:30 a.m. The rain was intensifying. By the time I reached the overlook where the road levels out, the wind was so strong I could barely control my car. I parked and looked down at Ketchikan, the harbor, the downtown, my house. Everything looked normal. Lights on in some buildings. The harbor calm. No indication of danger. At 3:17 a.m. I saw it. A wall of water coming in from the strait. Not a normal wave. Something massive. Dark. Moving fast. It hit the harbor with a sound like thunder. Swept over the docks. Surged into the streets. I watched the water rise. Watched it swallow the lower parts of town. Watched cars float away like toys. Watched buildings collapse under the force. My house was in the direct path. I watched the wave hit it. Watched the structure shudder and crack. Watched my bedroom window explode inward under thousands of gallons of seawater. If I'd been in that bed, I would have drowned. The wave receded after 20 minutes. Left behind destroyed buildings, flooded streets, overturned boats. 3 people died that night. 2 who were sleeping in ground floor apartments. 1 who had been walking near the harbor. The news called it a rogue wave. A meteorological anomaly. Something about underwater landslides and unusual tide conditions. But the Weather Service admitted they hadn't predicted it, hadn't seen it coming, had no warning systems in place. But Edmund had known, had been warning people for days, had shown up at houses all over Ketchikan, dripping with seawater, pointing toward the harbor. Most people had ignored him, called him a hallucination, a legend. Patricia's boat was safe. She moved it to high ground. 3 other fishermen who seen Edmund had done the same. We all survived because we listened to a dead man who spent his life trying to protect people and couldn't stop even in death. I went back to my house 2 days later. The first floor was destroyed. Everything soaked. Walls warped. Furniture ruined. But when I went to my bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the floor, where Edmund had been standing, was a pool of dried salt. Pure white salt, like seawater had evaporated there. And in the salt, traced as if by a finger, were words, "Thank you for listening. I'm staying in a hotel now while my house is being repaired. But I keep watching the weather, keep checking the forecasts, because Patricia told me something yesterday that I can stop thinking about." Edmund doesn't just appear before rogue waves. He appears before any major disaster connected to the sea. Tsunamis, ship sinkings, harbor accidents. If you see him pointing, something terrible is coming from the water. And last night, Patricia saw him again. Not at her house, at the harbor, standing at the end of the main dock. But this time, he wasn't pointing toward the sea. He was pointing inland, toward the town, toward the mountains. She doesn't know what it means. Neither do I, but Edmund has never been wrong. If he is pointing away from the sea, maybe the danger isn't coming from the water this time. Maybe it is something else, something worse. The rain has been constant for 3 days now, heavier than normal. The mountains above Ketchikan are saturated. The news is mentioning possible mudslide risks, but no evacuations have been ordered. No warnings issued. I've been having dreams. In them, I see Edmund standing in the rain. But he is not alone anymore. There are others with him. Dozens of them, all dripping with seawater, all pointing toward the mountain, all with their mouths open, trying to warn people who can to hear them. I think I know what is coming. I think the mountain is going to come down. All that rain, all that saturated earth, all that weight. And when it slides, it is going to take half of Ketchikan with it. I've tried telling people, the police, the city officials. They smile politely and tell me they re-monitoring the situation. They mention trauma from the rogue wave. Suggest I talk to a therapist. They don't believe in ghosts. Don't believe the dead can warn the living. But I know what I saw. I know Edmund saved my life. And I know he is trying to save more lives now. Trying to warn us about something that is coming. Something the weather services can predict and the officials want to acknowledge until it It's too late. So I'm leaving, driving south today, getting out of Ketchikan until the rain stops and the ground stabilizes. I told everyone I know, warned them to get to high ground or leave town. Some are listening, most Aaron T. And last night, I saw Edmund one more time, standing at the end of my hotel parking lot, drenched as always, but now he was looking directly at me. And instead of pointing, he nodded. Just once, like he was saying goodbye, like his work with me was done. Then he turned and walked toward the mountain, toward whatever disaster he has been trying to prevent, toward the place where he stand in the rain, pointing and warning, hoping someone will finally listen before the earth comes down and buries everything. So here is my question for you. If you saw a ghost outside your window, dripping with water, pointing toward danger that no one else could predict, would you listen? Would you trust a warning from the dead? Or would you ignore it, convince yourself it was just your imagination, and wait to see if the impossible really could happen? Think about it, because somewhere tonight, Edmund Vickers is standing in the rain outside this window, pointing, warning, trying to save one more life before it's too late. Maybe that someone is you. Story 3. Cursed film Reel the Face in the final frame was made of frost, and 3 days after I watched the film, my fingertips started turning black. My name is Derek Paulson. I am an archivist at the Alaska State Library in Juneau. They spent 12 years cataloging historical documents, photographs, and film materials from Alaska as past. They handled everything from Russian colonial records to Gold Rush era photos. In all that time, I never believed in curses. Never thought an object could carry genuine malevolence. Then I found the canister in the back of storage room C, and everything I thought I understood about reality came apart. It was November 2018. We were doing a complete inventory of our film collection. Most of it was standard stuff. Educational reels from the 50s and 60s, tourism footage, government documentaries about Alaska statehood. But this canister wasn't in our catalog. No acquisition record, no label, just a rusted metal container about the size of a coffee can, shoved behind a filing cabinet that probably hadn't been moved since 1974. I opened it carefully. The film inside was old, 16 millimeter, black and white. The edges were brittle, but the stock was surprisingly intact. There was a handwritten note tucked inside the lid. Just 3 words in faded pencil. Do not watch. That should have been enough. That should have made me seal it up and forget about it. But archivists are curious by nature. We exist to preserve and share history. So I transferred the reel to our viewing room and threaded it through the projector. The film had no opening credits. No title card. It just started with shaky handheld footage of an Alaskan forest. Dense spruce, heavy underbrush, late autumn by the look of it. Most of the leaves were gone. The footage quality suggested late 1950s, maybe early 60s. The camera was moving fast, running. The operator was clearly in a panic, stumbling over roots, branches whipping past the lens. I could see his breath fogging in the cold air, see ice crystals forming on the camera housing. Then the footage stabilized for a moment. The cameraman had stopped, bracing against a tree. He panned slowly across the forest behind him. And that is when I saw it. Movement in the deep background. Something tall moving between the trees. The image was grainy. The figure was distant, but I could make out a basic shape. Humanoid, maybe 7 feet tall, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the head oddly shaped, and there was something about the way it moved. Too smooth, too fluid, like it was gliding rather than walking. The cameraman saw it too. The footage jerked violently as he started running again. Faster now, more desperate. The audio track was just wind and breathing and the crash of branches. No words, no screams, just the sound of someone running for their life through a frozen forest. This continued for maybe 3 minutes. Then the cameraman fell. The camera hit the ground hard, lens pointing up at the canopy. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just the view of bare branches against a gray sky. Then a shadow fell across the lens. The figure was standing over the cameraman. I still couldn't see details. Just a dark silhouette blocking the light. The footage flickered, jumped, like the film stock itself was damaged. And then, in the final 10 seconds, the image changed. The camera was suddenly pointing at something else. A face, filling the entire frame. And this face, this horrible face, it wasn't made of flesh. It was made of frost. Hoarfrost. Those intricate ice crystals that form on cold surfaces. They were arranged in the rough approximation of human features. Eyes, nose, mouth, but all of it crystalline. Delicate, Beautiful and terrible at the same time. The face was looking directly into the camera, directly at whoever was filming. And here is the part that made my skin crawl. It moved, not like a mask or a sculpture. It tracked, followed, like it was studying the lens, studying the cameraman. The frost crystals shifted and reformed, maintaining that horrible approximation of a face while adjusting its angle. Its gaze, and then the film ended. Just cut to black. No fade, no credit sequence, just over. I sat in the dark viewing room for several minutes, trying to process what I'd seen. The footage was clearly genuine. Not a hoax, not staged. The panic in the camera movements was real. The environment was real. And that final shot of the frost face, that was something I'd never seen before. Some kind of natural formation? Ice crystallization on a surface? But the way it moved, the way it seemed to track the camera, that wasn't the natural. That was something else. I made the mistake of showing it to my colleagues, 3 other archivists. We watched it together in the main viewing theater. All of us were captivated by that final frame. The frost face. We paused the film on that shot, studied it closely, and that when I noticed something that stopped my heart. The face wasn't looking at the camera anymore. It had shifted. In the single frame, frozen in time, the frost-formed eyes were looking to the left, toward the corner of the room, where one of my colleagues, a woman named Sarah, was sitting. Sarah noticed it too, said she felt like it was staring at her. We laughed nervously, told her it was just the pattern of the frost, the angle of the light. Ice crystals done. We have eyes. Done, T-Track viewers. But she left early that day. Said she felt cold. Said her fingers were numb. Said she needed to go home and warm up. The next morning, Sarah didn't come to work. Her roommate called. Said Sarah had developed severe frostbite overnight. On her hands, her face, her feet. The doctors were baffled. She'd been indoors, in a heated apartment, wearing warm clothes. There was no environmental explanation. No exposure. No reason for tissue to freeze. But it had. Her fingertips were black. Dead tissue. Second-degree frostbite on her cheeks. The kind of damage you see in people who've been exposed to extreme cold for hours. But Sarah had been inside. Safe. Warm. And still, her body had frozen. I went back to the film. Watched it alone. Studied that final frame. The frost face. And I swear it had changed again. The eyes were looking in a different direction now. Toward where I'd been sitting. Toward where I was sitting. I felt a chill run through me. Not psychological. Physical. The temperature in the viewing room had dropped. My breath was visible. Frost was forming on the projector lens. And I felt it. Felt something watching me. Something aware. Something that had been trapped in that film for 60 years and was finally being seen. Finally being acknowledged. Finally being given attention. I shut off the projector and sealed the film back in its canister. But it was too late. The damage was done. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. with my hands burning. Not hot. Cold. So cold they felt like they were on fire. I turned on the light and saw my fingertips. They were white, bloodless. Then they started turning blue. Then gray. Then black. I ran them under warm water, rubbed them, tried to restore circulation. Nothing worked. The cold was coming from inside. From my cells. From my bones. Like something had reached into my body and frozen it from within. I went to the emergency room. The doctors were as confused as Sarah had been. No environmental exposure. No medical condition. No explanation. Just rapid onset frostbite in a controlled environment. They treated it the best they could. Warming therapy. Medication. But the blackened tissue didn't respond. 3 days later, they amputated the tips of my left index and middle fingers. The frostbite had gone too deep. The tissue was dead. Necrotic. And still cold to the touch even after removal. The other 2 archivists who did watch the film developed similar symptoms. One lost 2 toes. The other lost part of her ear. All of us experienced the same thing. Sudden, inexplicable frostbite appearing days after viewing the film. And all of us reported the same sensation. The feeling of being watched. Of something cold focusing its attention on us. Of the frost face tracking us even when we weren't near the film. Even when we were miles away. I researched the film, its origins. Found nothing in our acquisition records. No donation logs. No purchase orders. It was like the canister had simply appeared. But I did find something else. A newspaper article from 1959. A cameraman working for a small Alaskan film company had gone missing during a location scout near Talkeetna. His equipment was found 2 weeks later. Camera, tripod, film canisters, everything except him. The search was called off after a month. Assumed dead. Probably fell through ice or got taken by a bear. His body was never recovered. The article mentioned his name, Robert Chen, and it mentioned something strange. Several searchers reported seeing a tall figure in the forest, always at a distance, always moving away when approached. They dismissed it as another searcher or a hunter, but one of the search party, an experienced tracker, said the figure left no tracks. Moved through snow without leaving impressions. He called off his part of the search, refusing to explain why beyond saying something wasn't right in those woods. Something that didn't belong. I found one more reference. A medical report from 1959. 3 members of the search party had been treated for unexplained frostbite. Tissue damage appearing days after the search ended. No environmental cause identified. The report was brief, clinical, but someone had written a note in the margin. Handwritten, almost illegible. The words chilled me more than the frostbite ever had. They saw it. The frost face. They remarked now. That is when I understood. The film wasn't documentation. It was a trap, a carrier, the frost face, whatever it was, whatever Robert Chen had encountered in that forest in 1959. It had somehow imprinted itself onto the film, captured itself, preserved itself in silver halide crystals and celluloid. And anyone who watched the film, anyone who looked into that crystalline face, became marked, became a target. The frostbite wasn't environmental. It was targeted, intentional. The frost face was reaching out from wherever it existed, reaching across time and space, and touching everyone who had seen it, claiming them, marking them as its own. I tried to destroy the film, burned it in an incinerator, watched it melt and blacken and turn to ash. Thought that would end it. But that night, the cold came back, worse than before. My chest started freezing. I could feel ice forming in my lungs. Around my heart, I was dying, freezing from the inside out. And in the darkness of my bedroom, I saw it, the frost face, not on a screen, not in a photograph, but there, in my room, formed from the moisture in the air, the condensation on the windows, ice crystals arranging themselves into those terrible features. Eyes, nose, mouth, all of it watching me, all of it aware. The face moved closer. I felt the temperature drop with each inch it approached. My vision blurred. My thoughts slowed. I was shutting down, going hypothermic, and the face just watched, studied, like it was learning, like it was understanding what I was, what we all were, warm things, living things, things that could be frozen, things that could be preserved, things that could be claimed. I don't remember passing out. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Severe hypothermia. Core temperature had dropped to 86 degrees. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, said I should have died, said they couldn't explain how I'd gotten so cold in a heated apartment. Said it was impossible, but my apartment wasn't heated anymore. When the paramedics found me, every surface was covered in frost. The thermostat read 28 degrees. In a building with central heating, in a room with no broken windows. The cold had simply appeared, manifested, because the frost face had been there, because it had marked me, because I watched the film. The other archivists, Aaron, doing well. Sarah lost 3 fingers total. She sees the frost face in reflections now. In windows, in mirrors, always watching, always there. The other 2 have quit their jobs, moved to warmer climates, Arizona, Florida, trying to escape the cold, but it follows them. They still wake up with frostbite, still feel the temperature drop, still see frost forming in impossible patterns, patterns that look like eyes, like a face, like something that exists in cold places and claims anyone who sees it. I am writing this as a warning. The film is gone, destroyed, but I don't think it matters. The frost face isn't trapped in that film anymore. It's out. It's aware. And it marks anyone who sees it, anyone who acknowledges it, anyone who looks into those crystalline eyes and recognizes intelligence, awareness, malevolence. If you ever find old film reels, if you ever discover something with no label and a warning not to watch, listen to that warning. Don, to be curious. Don, to seek to preserve and share. Some things are lost for a reason. Some things are buried because they shouldn't to be seen. Because seeing them means being seen, being marked, being claimed by something that exists in the cold spaces between reality. Something that was filmed in a frozen Alaskan forest in 1959. Something that took Robert Chen. Something that now knows we exist and hunts us through the frost. Story 4. Coordinates. I stopped believing in ghost stories the day I bought my first fishing boat. That was 12 years ago, back when I thought the ocean was just water and fish and physics. But on January 14th, 2024, at exactly 2:47 in the morning, somewhere in the black waters off Kodiak Island, I learned that some stories refuse to stay dead. The radio crackled to life while I was hauling in my third net of the night. At first, I thought it was interference. The sound was faint, buried under static, like someone whispering through broken glass. I almost ignored it. I should have ignored it. But then I heard the numbers. 57.43 north, 152.91 west. The voice was calm, methodical, like a pilot reading off coordinates during a routine flight. But there was something underneath it, something wet, like the speaker was drowning while he talked. I grabbed my chart and plotted the position. My hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just the cold. The coordinates pointed to a spot about 40 miles northeast of my current position. Deep water, dangerous water, the kind of place where the currents run strange and the ocean floor drops away into nothing. Unknown vessel, this is the Melissa Jane. I transmitted back. Please identify yourself and state your emergency. Nothing but static answered me. I should mention something now, something every fisherman in Kodiak knows, but nobody likes to talk about. In October of 1998, a boat called the Mary Catherine went down during a storm. The skipper was a man named Robert Henley, 42 years old, experienced, careful, the kind of guy who checked the weather 3 times before leaving port. They found his boat 3 weeks later, drifting near Marmot Island. The hull was intact, the engine was fine, but Robert was gone, and the entire vessel was encased in a thick layer of ice. Not frost, ice. In October, when the water temperature was still above freezing, the Coast Guard wrote it off as a tragic accident. Fishermen wrote it off as something else. Every full moon since then, someone reports seeing the Mary Catherine. Always in a different location, always empty, always covered in ice, and sometimes, if you re-listening on channel 16 at the right time, you hear Robert Henley, his voice giving coordinates. I checked my calendar app. Full moon, tonight. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to ignore the transmission and head back to port. I had a decent haul. The weather was turning. There was no reason to chase a ghost story into dangerous waters at 3 in the morning. But the coordinates kept repeating, every 60 seconds, precise, insistent, 57.43 north, 152.91 west. I turned my boat northeast. The sea changed as I got closer to the coordinates. The swells grew longer, deeper, like the ocean was breathing. My depth finder showed the bottom dropping away. 600 feet, 800, 1200. The moon was full and bright, turning the water into liquid silver. But somehow the light made everything feel more exposed, more vulnerable. At 4:18 a.m., I reached the coordinates. There was nothing there, just open water and moonlight and the sound of my engine cutting through the silence. I killed the throttle and let my boat drift, listening. The radio had gone quiet. No more coordinates. No more whispers. I was about to restart the engine when I saw it. A boat, maybe 200 yards off my port side. Dead in the water. Even from that distance, I could see the ice coating its hull. It gleamed in the moonlight like something crystalline and alien. The Mary Catherine. It had to be. My VHF crackled. Come closer. The voice was clearer now. Still wet. Still wrong. But definitely human. Or it had been human once. Robert, I heard myself ask. My voice sounded small and stupid in the darkness. Come closer. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to fire up my engine and head back to Kodiak at full throttle. But I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Something in that voice that bypassed my conscious mind and went straight to some older, darker part of my brain that still believed in things that couldn't be explained. I started my engine and moved toward the Mary Catherine. As I got closer, I could see details that made my stomach turn. The ice wasn't just coating the boat. It was growing out of it. Long crystalline formations jutted from the railings in the cabin, like frozen fingers reaching toward the sky. The windows were dark, the deck was empty, but I could see footprints in the ice. Fresh footprints, leading from the cabin to the stern and then stopping at the rail. As if someone had walked to the edge and simply stepped off into the water. I pulled alongside, keeping about 20 feet between our boats. Up close, I could see that the name on the hull was partially obscured by ice, but I could still make out the letters. Mary Catherine, Kodiak, Alaska. The radio crackled again. Inside. Inside what? I asked. The cabin. You need to see. I'm not boarding that boat. I said. You already have. I looked down at my deck. Ice was forming along my railings. Thin at first, like frost, but growing thicker as I watched. Spreading. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees in the last 2 minutes. My breath came out in white clouds. The water around both boats was starting to freeze. Not solid, but slushy. Thick, like the ocean itself was turning to ice. "What is happening?" I shouted into the radio. "He wants you to understand," the voice said. Not Robert's voice anymore. Someone else. Something else. He wants everyone to understand what is down there. What? It's waiting. The ice was climbing up my cabin now. I could hear it creaking and groaning as it grew. My engine sputtered. The cold was getting into the fuel lines. If I didn't to move soon, to be frozen in place. Just like the Mary Catherine, I shoved my throttle forward. My engine screamed. The ice cracked. My boat lurched forward, breaking free from the spreading freeze. I didn't look back. I pushed my engine to its limit, racing away from those coordinates, from that ghost boat, from whatever impossible thing was happening in those waters. The ice stopped spreading once I was about a mile away. The temperature returned to normal. The radio went silent. But as I headed back toward Kodiak in the pre-dawn darkness, I noticed something that made my blood run colder than any ice. My GPS was showing a new waypoint. I hadn't entered it, hadn't touched my navigation system. But there it was, saved, marked, labeled with today, his date, 57.43 north, 152.91 west. The same coordinates, waiting for me, waiting for the next full moon. I sold my boat 3 days later, told everyone I was retiring, moving to Arizona to be closer to my daughter. Nobody questioned it, but the truth is, I still hear that voice sometimes. On car radios, on my phone, in the static between stations. Always the same, always whispering coordinates. And every full moon, I have to fight the urge to drive to the harbor, rent a boat, and go back. Because part of me knows, part of me understands, whatever Robert Henley found in those deep waters, whatever made him disappear and left his boat covered in impossible ice, it's still down there. Still waiting. Still calling. And someday, when I'm weak or curious or just tired of running, I'm going to answer. The question that keeps me awake at night is simple. What did Robert see that made him walk off his boat into freezing water? What is down there in the deep that is cold enough to freeze the ocean in October? I don't know, but I think I'm going to find out. We all do, eventually. Everyone who hears those coordinates. Everyone who gets close enough to see the Mary Catherine on a full moon night. The ocean remembers, and it is patient. So here is my question for you. If you heard those coordinates crackling through your radio in the dead of night, would you go? Would you need to know what is waiting in those deep, dark waters? Or are you smarter than me? Story 5. Wasilla Shadow Stalker. I stopped believing in coincidences the night I reviewed the security footage from my backyard camera in Wasilla, Alaska. What I saw standing behind my tool shed at 3 in the morning should not exist. But before I tell you about that, you need to understand that I am not the kind of person who scares easily. I spent 20 years as an electrician, working alone in crawl spaces and attics where most people would not last 5 minutes. I have seen rats the size of house cats and enough black mold to fill a swimming pool. Nothing bothered me. Until February of last year. The winter had been brutal even by Alaska standards. Temperatures dropped to 30 below zero for weeks straight, and the darkness felt heavier than usual. My wife had left me 3 months earlier, took our daughter to Anchorage, said she could not handle the isolation anymore. I understood. Wasilla is not for everyone. 50,000 people spread across hundreds of square miles of frozen wilderness. Your nearest neighbor might be a quarter mile away. Mine was. An older man named Gerald who kept to himself and only waved when our trucks passed on the road. I installed the security cameras after someone broke into my garage and stole my generator. The police took a report and told me they would keep an eye out, but we both knew that meant nothing. So I spent $400 on a system with motion-activated recording and night vision. I mounted cameras at each corner of my property. The house sat on 2 acres backed by dense spruce forest. Beautiful during summer, menacing in winter. The first incident happened on a Tuesday. I woke up to 17 motion alerts on my phone, all between 2 and 4 in the morning. I scrolled through the notifications while drinking coffee, expecting to see a moose or maybe a fox. Instead, I saw nothing. Just my snow-covered yard, the tool shed, the tree line. But something had triggered the sensors. I checked the settings. Everything looked normal. I deleted the alerts and went to work. It happened again Thursday, then Saturday, then every single night for a week. Always the same time frame. Always the same empty footage. I started to wonder if the cold was causing malfunctions. Electronics do strange things in extreme temperatures. I checked the forums online. Other people in Alaska complained about false alerts from their security systems, blaming weather, animals, even the northern lights somehow interfering with infrared sensors. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then I saw the footprints. They appeared after a fresh snowfall on a Wednesday morning. I stepped outside to warm up my truck and noticed them immediately. Large prints, too big to be human, starting from the edge of my property near the forest and leading straight toward my house. They circled the tool shed 3 times, then moved to my back door. They stopped there, just stopped, right at the threshold, as if something had stood there, inches from the glass, looking inside while I slept. But here's what made my stomach drop. The prints did not lead away. They simply ended. No return path to the forest. No tracks leading anywhere else. Just those circular patterns around the shed and then nothing. Like whatever made them had vanished into the air. I called Gerald, asked if he had seen anything unusual. He laughed, said the cold makes people see things that are not there, told me to get some rest. I almost believed him. Then he said something that stayed with me. He mentioned that 3 years ago, before I bought the property, a woman had lived in my house. She had called the police 7 times in 2 months, claiming someone was watching her through the windows at night. They never found anyone. She moved away suddenly, sold the house for half its value. That night, I sat in my living room with every light on, watching the security feed on my laptop. The camera showed 4 different angles of my property in perfect clarity. I kept the volume high, listening for any sound. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Nothing. My eyes started to burn. I made more coffee. At 2:47 in the morning, the back camera triggered. I clicked on the feed. At first, I saw only the tool shed and the trees beyond it. Then I noticed something at the edge of the frame. A shadow, tall and impossibly thin, standing between 2 spruce trees about 30 feet from my house. It did not move, just stood there. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting. The night vision made everything look green and grainy, but I could make out a vague shape. Too tall to be a person, maybe 7 or 8 feet. The proportions were wrong. Arms too long, head too narrow. I grabbed my phone and called the police. While I waited on hold, I kept watching the feed. The shadow remained motionless for 3 minutes. Then it stepped forward. Not walked, stepped. One moment it was by the trees. The next it had moved 10 feet closer without any transition. Like watching a video with missing frames. It did this twice more, each time appearing closer to my house in sudden jumps. My hands started shaking. The dispatcher finally answered. I tried to explain what I was seeing, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded insane. The dispatcher asked if I was in immediate danger. I said I did not know. She said an officer would come by when one became available. Could be an hour, could be 3. I hung up and looked back at the laptop. The shadow was gone. I ran to the back door, looked out through the glass. My motion lights had not activated. The yard appeared empty, but then I saw it, standing directly behind the tool shed, barely visible in the darkness beyond the light, its reach. A figure, watching me. I could feel its gaze even though I could not see its eyes. We stood there, separated by 60 feet of frozen ground and a pane of glass, staring at each other. Then it moved sideways, disappearing behind the shed. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my couch with a baseball bat, watching the doors, listening to the house settle and creak around me. The police arrived at 5 in the morning. 2 officers. They were polite but skeptical. I showed them the footage. They watched in silence. One of them, a younger guy with a thick beard, leaned back and crossed his arms. He told me they had been getting reports about something similar for the past 6 weeks. Different houses, all in the Wasilla area. People seeing a tall figure in their yards at night. Security cameras picking up strange shapes. But every time they investigated, they found nothing concrete. Just prints that ended mysteriously or blurry footage that could be explained away as shadows or animals. He said they were taking it seriously but had no leads. The other officer, older and quieter, walked around my property with a flashlight. When he came back inside, he looked uncomfortable. He had found the footprints again, fresh ones, from that night, and they vanished in the middle of my driveway, right where the asphalt met the snow. After they left, I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe someone was playing a sick prank. Maybe it was a stalker with some kind of technology I did not understand. But I could not explain the footage. I could not explain the prints. And I definitely could not explain the feeling of being watched that never went away, even in broad daylight. I started researching, hours every night, digging through local news archives and internet forums. I found a post from 5 years ago. A man in Wasilla had taken his own life after claiming something was stalking him. His wife told reporters he had become paranoid, convinced that a shadow person was following him home from work, standing outside their bedroom window, appearing in reflections where no one should be. The doctors called it a psychotic break. His family called it tragedy. But nobody called it what it might have actually been. Then I found the pattern. Every 7 to 10 years, going back to the 1970s, there were reports of a similar figure in the Wasilla area. Always in winter, always at night, always watching. The descriptions varied slightly, but the core details remained consistent. Unusually tall, wrong proportions, appears and disappears without leaving complete tracks. Some reports mentioned distorted shapes on photographs. Others described a feeling of profound wrongness when the figure was nearby. One account from 1983 mentioned that the figure seemed to exist slightly out of phase with normal reality, like it was not completely there. On my 16th night of seeing the shadow, something changed. I was reviewing footage from all 4 cameras when I noticed something I had missed before. The timestamps. When the figure appeared on the back camera, the timestamp flickered. Just for a second, the numbers became scrambled, replaced by symbols I did not recognize. Then they returned to normal. I went back through every piece of footage where the figure appeared. Same thing, every single time. The timestamps corrupted at the exact moment it entered the frame. I showed this to a friend who works in IT. He could not explain it. Said it looked like data corruption, but in a way he had never seen before. Like something was interfering with the camera, this internal clock. He asked me if I had checked the other cameras at those same moments. I had not. We pulled up the footage. At the exact time the back camera showed the figure and the timestamp flickered, the 3 other cameras went completely black for 5 to 7 seconds. Not offline, not disconnected, just black, as if something had blocked all the lenses simultaneously. But that was impossible. The cameras pointed in different directions. Nothing could cover all of them at once unless it was everywhere around my house. That realization broke something inside me. I stopped going to work. I barely ate. I just watched the cameras and waited. My phone filled with messages from my ex-wife, from my boss, from friends I had not spoken to in months. I ignored all of them, because I knew it was coming. I could feel it getting closer, becoming bolder. The footprints now appeared every morning, circling tighter around my house. The figure showed up earlier each night, stayed longer, moved closer. Last week, I woke up at 3 in the morning to find every light in my house off. I had left them all on. I know I did. I grabbed my phone, used the flashlight to navigate to the breaker box. Everything was switched off, all of them. I flipped them back on. The lights returned, and that is when I noticed my back door was open. Not broken, not forced, just open, standing wide like an invitation. Snow had blown inside, covering my kitchen floor, and in that snow, there were prints, the same massive prints from outside. They came through the door, walked into my living room, stopped in front of the couch where I had been sleeping, then returned outside. I had not heard a thing. I left that morning, threw clothes in my truck and drove to Anchorage. I am staying with my ex-wife now. She thinks I had a breakdown. Maybe I did. But I still check the security cameras every night. The house sits empty, dark, waiting, and sometimes, on the feeds, I see the figure, standing in my living room, moving through the hallways, looking into the camera with whatever it has instead of eyes. The police closed the case, said there was insufficient evidence. The detective suggested I had been experiencing stress-induced hallucinations. But I know what I saw. And I know I am not the only one. Because 2 days ago, someone posted in a Wasilla community group asking if anyone else had seen the tall shadow near their property. 17 people responded, all describing the same thing, all terrified, and all of them, every single one, mentioned the same detail I never shared publicly. The way it moves without walking, the way it appears closer in sudden jumps, like a glitch in reality itself. I will never go back to that house. I will sell it or let the bank take it. I do not care, because I learned something during those weeks of terror. Some things should not be explained. Some things exist in the spaces between what we understand and what we fear. And in Wasilla, Alaska, in the deepest part of winter, something is watching. Something is waiting. Something that leaves frozen footprints ending in the middle of empty streets. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt watched in your own home? Have you ever seen something in your yard that disappeared before you could focus on it? Have you checked your security footage for moments where time does not quite match up? Because if you have, I need you to think carefully about what comes next. And I need you to tell me in the comments. because I am starting to believe this thing is not confined to Alaska. I think it moves. I think it chooses. And I think once it notices you, it never really leaves. What would you do if you saw it standing behind your tool shed tonight? Story 6. I found the bodies on April 7th, and I need you to understand something right now. They were holding coffee cups. Steam was rising from the liquid inside, but these people had been dead for over 100 years. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was working the spring thaw contract for the state of Alaska, clearing debris from the old mining roads outside Nome. It was supposed to be simple work, 3 weeks of solitude, decent pay, and then back to Anchorage before the mosquito season turned the tundra into hell. I had done this job for 6 years. I knew every abandoned shack, every forgotten piece of equipment slowly being reclaimed by the permafrost. But I had never seen the café. It appeared on the third day, emerging from a snowbank like something surfacing from deep water. The building was small, maybe 20 feet across, with weathered clapboard siding and a hand-painted sign that read Frontier Coffee House in faded red letters. The strange thing was not that it existed. Nome is full of forgotten relics from the gold rush days. The strange thing was that I had driven past this exact spot 2 days earlier, and there had been nothing but solid snow. I should have kept driving. Every instinct I had developed in 6 Alaskan winters told me to mark it on my map and report it to the Historical Society when I got back to town. But there was something about the windows. They were not broken or boarded up like every other abandoned building in the region. They were intact, and through the frost-covered glass, I could see light. I parked my truck and approached on foot. The snow around the building was undisturbed except for my own tracks. No animal prints, no wind patterns, just smooth white emptiness stretching in every direction. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees, but I felt colder standing in front of that door than I had all winter. The door was unlocked. It opened with a soft creak that seemed too loud in the absolute silence of the tundra. The interior was dim, lit by oil lamps that burned with steady flames despite the fact that no one could have lit them. The air smelled like coffee and something else, something sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in a closed room. 3 people sat at a corner table. They were dressed in clothes from another era. The man wore a wool suit with a high collar and a pocket watch chain visible across his vest. The 2 women wore long dresses with their hair pinned up in the style of the 1920s. All 3 held white ceramic cups in their hands, and I could see the dark liquid inside, still steaming in the cold air. None of them moved. None of them breathed. Their skin had the waxy, translucent quality of something that had been frozen solid and recently thawed. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing, filmed over with a white haze that made them look like old photographs of the dead. I should have run, instead. I moved closer, pulled forward by a curiosity that felt like something outside my own will. The floorboards creaked under my boots, and the sound made my heart slam against my ribs, but the figures at the table did not react. I reached out and touched the back of the nearest chair. It was warm. The wood radiated heat as if someone had been gripping it moments before. I jerked my hand back and stumbled against another table, sending a sugar bowl clattering to the floor. The white crystals spilled across the dark wood, and I watched them scatter like tiny bones across a grave. That was when I noticed the newspaper. It sat folded on the counter near an old brass cash register, and the date printed across the top was March 19th, 1924. The headline read "Gold Strike Promises Fortune for Lucky Few." Below it, a smaller article caught my eye. Local residents report strange lights over Frozen Bay. I picked up the paper with shaking hands. The ink was fresh. When I touched the letters, they smeared slightly across my fingertips, leaving dark marks on my skin. This newspaper was not 100 years old. It had been printed recently, designed to look authentic, placed here for someone to find. For me to find. The sound started then. A low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves, rising and falling like breath. The oil lamps flickered. The steam from the coffee cups grew thicker, obscuring the faces of the 3 frozen figures. I backed toward the door, but my legs felt heavy, as if the air had turned to syrup around me. One of the women tilted her head. The movement was slight, just a few degrees to the left, but it was deliberate. Controlled. Her eyes shifted in their sockets, the white film sliding away to reveal pupils so dilated they looked like holes punched through her skull. She was looking directly at me. I ran. My boots slipped on the wooden floor, and I crashed through the door into the blinding white of the snowfield. Behind me, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against wood, of footsteps that moved too fast and too light to be natural. I did not look back. I sprinted to my truck, threw myself into the driver's seat, and gunned the engine. The wheels spun in the snow for a terrible 3 seconds before they caught traction. And then I was moving, racing down the access road with my heart trying to break through my chest. I drove for 20 minutes before I dared to check the rearview mirror. The cafe was gone. The snowbank where it had emerged was smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing had been there at all. But when I looked down at my hands gripping the steering wheel, I saw the newspaper ink still staining my fingers. I reported it when I got back to Nome. The dispatcher listened with the patient expression of someone who had heard too many isolation stories from contract workers. She promised to send someone to check the location and suggested I take a few days off. Get some rest. The tundra plays tricks on people who spend too much time alone out there. But 3 days later, the state police called me in for questioning. They had found the cafe exactly where I said it would be, and they had found the bodies. 3 of them, seated at a corner table, holding cups of coffee that had somehow remained liquid despite the sub-zero temperatures. The clothing matched my description perfectly. Wool suit, long dresses, 1920s style. What they could not explain was the autopsy. The coroner confirmed that all 3 had died within the last 72 hours. Cause of death was hypothermia. But their dental work, their bone density, their clothing fibers, everything about them belonged to people who had lived and died in the early 20th century. The coffee in their cups was tested. It was brewed using a method that had not been common since the gold rush days, but the beans themselves were from a crop harvested last year in Colombia. The investigation expanded. Historical records showed that 3 people matching the descriptions had disappeared from Nome in March of 1924 during a severe blizzard. They had last been seen entering a coffee house near the edge of town. The building had burned down 2 weeks later under mysterious circumstances. No bodies were ever recovered. But here's what kept me awake for the next 6 months. Here's what made me quit my job and move to Arizona, where the sun always shines and nothing stays frozen long enough to preserve secrets. During the investigation, the police found something else in the cafe. Sitting on the counter next to the old brass cash register was a second newspaper. Same date, March 19th, 1924. Same headline about the gold strike. But this one had a different article below it. This one read, "State worker reports strange discovery near Mining Road." The article was about me. It described my findings in perfect detail, down to the color of my truck and the brand of boots I was wearing. It even included my full name and the fact that I had worked the spring thaw contract for 6 years. The article was dated March 19th, 1924, almost exactly 100 years before I found the cafe. The police sealed the building and posted guards. But during the night, between the second and third day of the investigation, something happened. The temperature dropped to -40, unusual even for Nome in early April. In the morning, the guards were found inside the cafe, seated at the corner table. They were holding cups of steaming coffee. Their eyes were open and filmed over with white. They had been dead, according to the coroner, for less than 12 hours. But their uniforms were wrong. The style was current, but the fabric composition matched materials that would not be manufactured for another 70 years. They burned the cafe to the ground after that, bulldozed the ashes and covered the site with gravel. The official report listed it as a historical hazard, structurally unsound, potential for toxic materials. They paid me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, though they did not need to. I was never going to talk about it anyway. Except I am talking about it now, because last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper. The date on it is April 7th, 2124. Exactly 100 years from the day I found the bodies. The headline reads, "Arizona resident disappears without trace." Below it is my photograph, the same one from my driver's license. The article describes how I will be found 3 days from now, seated at a table in a small cafe that appeared suddenly in the desert outside Phoenix. How I will be holding a cup of coffee. How the authorities will confirm I died recently, even though everything about me will belong to someone from 100 years ago. I do not know if I can stop it. I do not know if running will help or if the cafe will find me wherever I go. All I know is that tonight, for the first time in 6 months, I can smell coffee brewing in my apartment. And the temperature has dropped 20 degrees in the last hour, even though I am in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. The steam is rising from my kitchen. I can see it curling under the door. And I can hear something that sounds like chairs scraping against a wooden floor. So I have one question for you. If you found a building that should not exist, filled with people who should not be alive, would you go inside? Or would you keep driving and hope that whatever is waiting in that frozen moment between past and future never learns your name? Because I went inside, and now it knows mine. Story 7. Woman in the snow. I need to tell you about something that happened 3 weeks ago at the Bethel Police Department. Because I can't sleep anymore, and maybe saying it out loud will help. Or maybe it won't. Maybe nothing helps when you heard a dead woman, this voice begging for help on a phone that was buried under 20 feet of snow 37 years ago. My name is Derek Kowalski, and I've been a dispatcher for the Bethel PD for 8 years. I've been taking calls from drunks, domestic disputes, missing persons, you name it. I thought I'd heard everything. But on October 23rd, at 11:34 p.m., my console lit up with a call that would make me question everything I thought I knew about what is possible. The caller ID showed a local number, 907-555-0147. I remember it exactly because I've seen it 43 times since that first night. I picked up the call and immediately heard static. Thick, heavy static, like the sound of wind tearing through a phone line. And underneath it, barely audible, a woman's voice. She was whispering, "The man in the snow is watching my house." That was all she said before the line went dead. 10 seconds, maybe less. I tried calling back immediately. The phone rang 6 times and went to a generic voicemail. No name, no message, just a beep. I logged it as a possible prowler and sent a unit to check the address associated with that number. Officer Martinez called me back 20 minutes later. His voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. The address was 447 Tundra Drive, a vacant lot. No house, no structure of any kind, just empty land covered in snow and dead grass. Martinez said he checked with the city records office. There had been a house there once, a small cabin, but it was destroyed in March of 1987 during an avalanche that came down from the hills behind town. A freak occurrence, the kind of thing that shouldn't happen in Bethel, but did. One person died in that avalanche. A woman named Sarah Vickery, 31 years old, lived alone. Her body was recovered 4 days after the slide. They found her in her bedroom, still clutching her landline phone. The phone number on record for that residence was 907-555-0147. I felt cold when Martinez told me that. The kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads outward until even your fingertips feel frozen. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Some sick kid who looked up old records and spoofed a dead woman. This number. But prank's done. To explain what happened next. The call came again 2 nights later. Same time, 11:34 p.m. Same number, same static. But this time, I could hear more. He is at the door now. He is knocking. Please send someone. Please. Her voice was terrified, desperate. I could hear the fear soaking through every syllable. And behind her words, I could hear something else. A slow, rhythmic sound. Thud, 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 like someone pounding on a door with the flat of their hand. I dispatched 2 units immediately. They raced to Tundra Drive with lights and sirens. They found nothing. Empty lot, fresh snow, no footprints, no tracks, no sign that anyone had been there in months. But the calls kept coming. Every 2 or 3 nights. Always at 11:34 p.m. Always the same number. And each time, Sarah Vickery's voice grew more panicked, more desperate. She started saying new things, describing things. The man in the snow had features now. Details. He is so tall. His face is wrong. His eyes don't blink. I started researching the avalanche. I went to the library and dug through old newspaper archives. The Bethel Gazette ran a story about Sarah's death. There wasn't too much information. She was a teacher at the elementary school. Quiet, kept to herself. No family in the area. The article mentioned that in the days before the avalanche, Sarah had called the police department 3 times to report a prowler. Someone standing in the woods behind her house. Watching. The responding officers found nothing each time. The night of the avalanche, Sarah called 911 at 11:34 p.m. She reported that someone was trying to break into her house. The dispatcher sent a unit, but the avalanche hit before they arrived. The wave of snow came down so fast and so hard that it obliterated the cabin in seconds. Sarah never made it out. When they recovered her body, they found her phone still in her hand. Still connected to 911. Still transmitting. The last thing recorded on that call was the sound of the avalanche and Sarah screaming and then nothing but static. I shared all this with my supervisor. He listened, looked uncomfortable, and told me to stop answering calls from that number. Let them go to voicemail. Log them as phantom calls. Equipment malfunction. Whatever made sense. But I couldn't stop. Because the calls were changing, evolving. On November 3rd, Sarah's voice was different, calmer, almost resigned. I can see him clearly now. He is not human. He never was. He is made of snow and cold and something older. Something that was here before the town. Before any of us. I asked her questions. Who are you? What do you want? Why are you calling? She never responded to my questions directly. It was like she couldn't. To hear me, like she was trapped in a loop, reliving the same night over and over. But then, on November 8th, something changed. I picked up the call. Same static. Same time. But this time, Sarah spoke directly to me. Derek, you need to stop answering. He knows you, re-listening now. He has seen you. She knew my name. I had never identified myself on any of the calls. I had never spoken my name out loud. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. How do you know who I am? Because he is standing behind you right now. I spun around in my chair so fast I nearly fell. The dispatch center was empty except for me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner. Nothing else. Nobody there. But the temperature had dropped. I could see my breath. And on the window behind my desk, frost was forming. Not random frost, patterns, shapes, like fingers pressing against the glass from the outside. I hung up the phone. That was 12 days ago. I haven't answered a call from that number since. But they keep coming. Every night, 11:34 p.m. Sometimes multiple times per night. The voicemails are piling up. I listened to a few. Sarah's voice is different now. Angry, accusatory. You were supposed to help me. You were supposed to send someone. But you were just like them. You were just like the others who didn't believe me. My supervisor finally had the phone company disconnect that number. They said it was already disconnected. Had been since 1987. There was no technical explanation for why it kept showing up on our system. No logical reason why calls could originate from a phone line that didn't exist. But the calls didn't stop. They just started coming from different numbers. Payphones around town. Cell phones belonging to people who swore they never made the calls. Always the same time. Always Sarah's voice. Always getting angrier. 3 nights ago, I woke up at 11:34 p.m. to my personal cell phone ringing. The caller ID said unknown. I didn't want to answer. But my hand moved on its own, like something else was controlling it. Sarah's voice came through. Crystal clear. No static this time. He's coming for you now, Derek. The man in the snow. He has been watching your house. He is standing in your backyard right now. Go look. I got out of bed, walked to my back window, drew the curtain. There was a figure standing at the edge of my property line. Tall, impossibly tall, 7 feet at least. It stood perfectly still in the falling snow. I couldn't make out features, just a dark silhouette against white, but I could feel it watching me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I closed the curtain and backed away from the window. When I looked again 5 minutes later, it was gone. But there were tracks in the snow. Deep tracks, leading from the woods to my window and then back again. The footprints were wrong. Too long. Too narrow. Like something was pretending to be human but didn't quite understand how feet were supposed to look. I called in sick yesterday. Told my supervisor I had the flu. The truth is, I'm terrified. I am sitting in a motel room in Anchorage right now, 200 miles from Bethel, and I still don't feel safe. Because last night, at 11:34 p.m., my phone rang again. I didn't answer, but the voicemail it left makes me think distance doesn't matter. Running doesn't matter. Sarah's voice was calm, almost friendly. You can leave, Derek. He won't let you. He is part of the land here, part of the snow and the cold and the long dark winters. And now that you heard my voice, now that you know what happened to me, you reconnected to this place. To him. Forever. I checked out of the motel an hour later, got in my car, started driving south. I made it 40 miles before my GPS started glitching. The screen showed my location as Bethel, 447 Tundra Drive. Even though I was nowhere near there, I pulled over and threw the GPS out the window. But my phone's map app showed the same thing. Bethel, Tundra Drive, the vacant lot where Sarah died. I am heading back now. I don't know what else to do. Maybe I need to go to that lot. Maybe I need to see what is there, what Sarah saw, what killed her and trapped her in some endless loop of terror. Or maybe that's exactly what it wants. Here is what I can to stop thinking about. Sarah called for help and nobody came in time. She died alone. terrified, calling out into the darkness. And now she is still calling, still trying to warn people, still trapped in that moment of absolute horror. What if I knew next? What if answering that first call connected me to whatever took her? What if the man in the snow is real and patient and has been waiting 37 years for someone else to hear his victim, his voice? I'll find out soon enough. I am 20 miles from Bethel now. It's 11:20 p.m. My phone's already ringing. So here, it's my question for you. If you were a dispatcher and a call came in from a dead person's phone, would you answer it? Would you try to help? Or would you let it ring, knowing that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again? Think carefully before you answer, because the man in the snow is always watching, always waiting, and he is very, very patient. Story 8. Bodies in the ice. The coroner said they died 2 days ago, but their clothes were from 1923. I was the foreman on a construction crew in Fairbanks, Alaska. February 2024. We were digging foundation trenches for a new medical complex on the east side of town, breaking through permafrost that had been frozen solid for thousands of years. Standard job, good pay, nothing unusual until the excavator blade hit something that was not rock or ice. It was a hand, human, perfectly preserved, fingers curled like it had been grasping something. We shut down immediately, called the authorities. Within an hour, the site was crawling with police, the medical examiner, and 2 people in unmarked vehicles who never identified what agency they worked for. They spent 6 hours carefully excavating around that hand. What they found made 3 of my crew quit on the spot. 2 bodies, a man and a woman, both in their 30s. Hands bound behind their backs with rope that looked hand-twisted, the kind nobody had manufactured in decades. The woman wore a wool dress with a pattern my grandmother might have recognized. The man had on canvas work pants and a cotton shirt with no modern synthetic fibers. Both wore leather boots with a maker, this mark the police traced to a cobbler in Fairbanks who went out of business in 1925. But here's what made the coroner go pale. Their skin was still pliable. Their eyes were clouded like they had died recently. When they checked core temperature and tissue decomposition, every test said the same thing. Time of death was approximately 48 hours prior, 2 days before we found them. Except their clothes were a century old. The rope binding their wrists was analyzed and dated to the early 1920s. Even the dirt in their hair and under their fingernails contained pollen from plant species that went extinct in interior Alaska in the 1930s. I was there when they brought in the historian, a professor from the University of Alaska who specialized in early 20th century Fairbanks. She took one look at the bodies and started shaking, pulled out a file of missing person reports from 1923. 2 people had vanished that March during a late winter cold snap. A prospector named James Whitmore and a school teacher named Sarah Hendricks. Both were last seen leaving a boarding house together. The description matched our bodies perfectly, down to a distinctive scar on the man, his left hand. The professor showed us a photograph, yellowed, cracked, taken in 1922 outside that same boarding house. The faces staring back from that century-old image were identical to the faces we had pulled from the ice. Same people? No question. But they had died 2 days ago. The medical examiner ran every test available. DNA, tissue samples, stomach contents. The food in their digestive systems was analyzed and matched meals common in 1920s Alaska. Sourdough bread, preserved meat. Nothing modern. Nothing that suggested they had eaten anything in the last 100 years except for their final meal in 1923. Yet their cells showed active decay consistent with recent death. Their blood had not fully coagulated. The woman, his eyes still had moisture. When they opened the man, his mouth, his tongue was pink and his breath smelled like old tobacco. One of the unnamed officials asked me about the permafrost conditions where we found them. I explained that the layer they were in had been frozen continuously since the last ice age. No thaw cycles, no possibility of the bodies being moved or reburied. The ice around them was 10,000 years old. They had been placed there in 1923 and stayed frozen until our excavator blade broke them free. He asked what the temperature was the day we found them. I checked my records. -38. Standard February cold. He asked what the temperature was 2 days before. I checked again. -42. Colder, not warmer. He wrote something in his notebook and told me not to discuss the case with anyone. Then he asked a question that has kept me awake every night since. He asked if we had noticed anything strange about the ice immediately surrounding the bodies. Any discoloration, any unusual formations. My equipment operator spoke up, said the ice had looked weird, cloudy, with dark streaks running through it like veins, almost organic. When the excavator blade hit it, the ice had made a sound. Not a crack or a snap. Something else. Almost like a sigh. The official closed his notebook. Told us the site was now federal jurisdiction. We were off the job effective immediately. Full pay for the contract, but we were not to return. Not to discuss what we found. Not to speculate. They brought in a specialized team that night. Guys in hazmat suits with equipment I did not recognize. They excavated 100 cubic yards of permafrost around where we found the bodies. Loaded it onto refrigerated trucks. By morning, the site was empty. Filled in, like nothing had happened. But I could not let it go. I started researching. Found newspaper archives from 1923. There were more disappearances that winter than I expected. 11 people vanished in Fairbanks between January and March 1923. All during extreme cold snaps. All last seen near the same area where we were digging. The boarding house district. Not a nice part of town back then. Prospectors, drifters, people nobody would miss. I found one article that made my blood run cold. March 18, 1923. A short piece buried on page 6. Local authorities were investigating reports of a strange phenomenon near the old ice houses on the east side. Multiple witnesses reported seeing figures standing in the ice. Not reflections, actual human shapes visible inside solid blocks of permafrost. The article ended abruptly. No follow-up, no explanation. I drove to the Historical Society. Asked about the ice houses. The archivist got nervous. Said the buildings were demolished in 1924 after several workers refused to enter them. Something about the ice being wrong. About seeing movement inside solid blocks. About hearing sounds that ice should not make. She showed me a map. The old ice house district was located exactly where we had been digging. I went back to the site against orders. Late at night, the area was still cordoned off but not actively guarded. I climbed the fence with a flashlight and a hand auger. If there were 2 bodies, maybe there were more. Maybe those 11 missing people from 1923 were all down there. Waiting, I drilled test holes in 6 locations. Hit permafrost at 3 feet. The ice came up cloudy. Dark, with those same vein-like streaks. I was examining the core samples when I heard it. The sound my operator had described. Like breathing, like the ice itself had lungs. I ran my light across the excavation. The walls of frozen earth looked different. The permafrost was not uniform. There were shapes in it. Distortions. I moved closer, pressed my face near the ice wall. There was something inside. A shadow. Human-shaped. I could see the outline of a coat. Hands. A face pressed against the ice from within. Eyes closed. Mouth open. I stumbled backward. Swept my light across the entire trench. There were more. Dozens. All frozen in the walls. Some close to the surface. Others deeper. A crowd of people locked in ice. Some in old clothes. Some in older clothes. Some in furs and skins that looked ancient. And they were not still. The shadows shifted. Moved. Like they were treading water in frozen time. Hands reached. Heads turned. All of it happening so slowly I could barely perceive the motion. But it was there. My light fell on one face. Close to the surface. Clear enough to see details. The woman, whose eyes snapped open, stared directly at me. Her mouth moved. Formed words I could not hear through 10 feet of solid ice. Help us. I ran. Fell. Crawled. Got back to my truck and locked the doors like that would make a difference. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because I was not thinking straight. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. One of the unnamed officials from the excavation. He asked if I had returned to the site. I said yes. He asked what I saw. I told him. Bodies in the ice. Dozens of them. Moving. Alive somehow. There was a long pause. Then he explained something I wish I did not know. Permafrost is not just frozen ground. In certain conditions, in certain places, it acts like a preservative beyond normal physics. Temperature alone does not explain it. Something about the pressure, the mineral content, the age of the ice. In rare locations, permafrost can suspend biological processes completely. Not just slow them, stop them, pause them. The bodies we found had been frozen for 100 years. But they had not experienced that time. For them, it was instantaneous. One moment they were dying in 1923. The next moment, we broke them free. 2 days elapsed for their bodies to realize they were dead, to catch up with a century of mist decay. He said there were more. Hundreds more. The entire icehouse district was built over a permafrost anomaly. A place where time does not flow correctly when you are frozen. The people who worked there in the 20s started to notice, started to see shapes in the ice, started to realize they were not alone in that cold. Some of those workers disappeared. Some went mad. The buildings were demolished. The area was abandoned, forgotten, until we started digging. He told me the federal team found 37 more bodies, all from different time periods. Some from the gold rush, some from before European contact, some so old they could not be dated, all perfectly preserved, all showing signs of recent death despite being frozen for decades or centuries. And all of them were still aware, still conscious inside the ice, experiencing every moment of their frozen imprisonment at normal speed while the world aged around them. The bodies we extracted had been screaming for 100 years. We just could not hear them until they thawed. The officials said the site was being permanently sealed. The permafrost would be left undisturbed. No more digging, no more construction. The medical complex project was canceled. Too much risk of finding more. Too much danger of releasing people who had been trapped beyond time. He asked if I understood why I could never speak about this. Why it had to remain classified. I said yes. Then I asked the question I needed to know. I asked if they put the 2 bodies back in the ice. If they refroze them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said they had no choice. That the man and woman had died 2 days after extraction, but their consciousness remained. That they were still aware inside their dead bodies, still experiencing the horror of being frozen in thought. That the only mercy was to put them back, to refreeze them, to let them sleep again in that timeless cold. I asked if they would ever be freed, ever be allowed to die properly. He said no, that the permafrost was permanent. That as long as the ice remained, so would they. Aware, frozen, waiting in a prison with no walls and no end. I quit construction, moved to Arizona, cannot handle the cold anymore. Cannot stop thinking about those faces in the ice. About how many people are down there. How many voices are screaming in frequencies we cannot hear. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be frozen mid-breath. To feel a century pass in perfect clarity while your body stays locked in that final moment. To watch the ice around you and see others. Dozens, hundreds, all trapped together in the same eternal instant. The official told me one more thing before he hung up. He said that permafrost is melting. Climate change, rising temperatures. Within 50 years, maybe less, that entire district will thaw. And when it does, everyone frozen there will wake up. All at once, hundreds of people from different centuries. All experiencing their deaths simultaneously. All screaming together after waiting in silence for decades or millennia. I pray I am dead before that happens. Because I have seen their faces. I have watched them move behind the ice. And I know they remember everyone who walked past them. Everyone who left them there. They remember me. Story 9. Phantom whaling station, the distress signal shouldn't have existed. And that was the first thing that should have made us turn around. My name is Robert Kane. I am a commercial fisherman. Spent 23 years working the Bering Sea out of Dutch Harbor. King crab mostly, some halibut when the season is right. I've seen rough weather, lost men overboard, watched boats go down in storms that came out of nowhere. But nothing in 2 decades on these waters prepared me for what we found on March 17, 2019. Nothing prepared me for the men with white skin and the station that shouldn't exist. We were 70 nautical miles northwest of St. Lawrence Island when our radio operator picked up the signal. A distress call on an ancient maritime frequency, the kind nobody uses anymore except in emergencies. The transmission was weak, crackling with static, but the message was clear. A whaling station requesting immediate assistance. Engine failure. Crew stranded. Coordinates followed. I checked the charts. There was nothing at those coordinates. No station. No settlement. Not even a rock. Just open water. But maritime law is clear. You respond to distress calls. No exceptions. So we changed course and headed toward the coordinates, expecting to find a stranded fishing vessel or maybe a Coast Guard cutter with radio problems. The fog rolled in 40 minutes later, thick and gray and wrong. It moved against the wind, flowing toward us instead of being pushed by it. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 5 minutes. Ice started forming on the deck rails. In March, during what should have been the warming season, my crew started getting nervous. These are men who have worked the Bering Sea their whole lives. They know when something is off. We reached the coordinates just after noon, though you couldn't tell by looking at the sky. The fog was so dense our spotlight barely penetrated 10 feet. We cut the engines and drifted, listening. That is when we heard it. The sound of machinery, old machinery, the rhythmic clank and hiss of steam engines from another era. Then the wind shifted and the fog parted for just a moment. Long enough for us to see it. A whaling station, sitting on the water like it had every right to be there. Wooden buildings on a floating platform. A processing facility with massive iron kettles visible through open doorways. Whale oil lamps hanging from posts, burning with yellow flames. And men, dozens of them, moving around the station, working, like it was 1890 and whaling was still king. My first thought was it had to be some kind of historical recreation. Maybe a museum piece being towed to a new location. But there were no tow lines, no modern support vessels, and the men weren't dressed in costumes. Their clothes were worn, stained with oil and blood. Real. These weren't actors. These were workers, and they'd been at this job for a very long time. We pulled alongside my first mate, a guy named Daniels who had been fishing these waters for 30 years, refused to board. Said something was wrong, said the station smelled like death and old ice. But the distress call had come from here. We had a legal obligation to respond. I took 3 men with me and crossed over to the floating platform. The moment my boots hit the wooden deck, everything felt wrong. The air was too cold, too still. Sound moved differently here, muffled and distant, even though I could see my crew clearly just 20 feet away on our boat. And the smell. Daniels was right. It smelled like death, but not fresh death, old death, preserved death. The kind of smell you get from opening a tomb that has been sealed for 100 years. The men working the station stopped what they were doing and turned to look at us. That is when I saw their skin. White, not pale, not sun-starved. White, like porcelain, like marble, like something that had never seen color. Their eyes were dark pits in those white faces. Their movements were slow and deliberate. And they were smiling, all of them, the same smile, too wide, too knowing. One of them approached. He was tall and thin, wearing a blood-stained apron and carrying a flensing knife the size of my forearm. His white skin seemed to glow in the dim light from the oil lamps. When he spoke, his voice came out in a whisper that somehow carried across the entire deck. He welcomed us, said they'd been expecting visitors, said the Great Freeze was coming and we arrived just in time. I asked about the distress call, about the engine failure. He looked confused for a moment, then that too wide smile returned. He said there was no engine failure, said they'd been operating continuously since 1887, said the station never stopped, never closed, never left these waters. The whales came to them, always had, always would. Behind him, I could see into one of the processing buildings. Massive iron kettles bubbled and steamed, but the liquid inside wasn't the brown black of rendered whale oil. It was clear, crystalline, like melted ice, and floating in those kettles were shapes, large shapes, not whales, something else, something with too many limbs, something that moved even as it boiled. One of my crew, a kid named Torres on his second season, started backing toward our boat. The white-skinned men noticed. They all turned at once, like a flock of birds changing direction. That same smile on every face. Torres ran, made it 3 steps before his boot caught on a coil of rope and he went down hard. The men didn't move toward him. They just watched, waited, and the fog started rolling back in. I pulled Torres to his feet and we started backing toward our boat. The tall man with the flensing knife took a step forward. He told us we couldn't leave yet. Told us they had fresh blubber, the best quality, harvested just this morning from the deep waters beyond the ice wall. He said it with pride, like he was offering us something precious, something rare. I told him we needed to return to our vessel. Radio back to port. He nodded slowly, said that was fine, said we could come back anytime, said the station would be here, always here, waiting. Then he gestured toward the processing building, said we should at least see the catch before we left, said we'd never seen whales like these, said nobody had, not in this world. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I looked through the open door of the processing building, past the boiling kettles, to the holding area beyond, and I saw them, the whales, except they weren't 2 whales. They were huge, yes, massive, but the shape was wrong. Too many fins, too many eyes, skin that seemed to shift between solid and liquid. And they were alive, still alive, even as the men worked on them with their knives and hooks and saws. The creatures didn't thrash or fight. They just watched with intelligent eyes. Eyes that found mine. Eyes that knew. That is when I understood. This wasn't a whaling station. It was a harvest facility. And these men with their white skin and dark eyes weren't hunting whales from our oceans. They were hunting something else. Something from deeper waters. Colder waters. Waters that existed in places where the ice wall the man mentioned actually meant something. We ran, all 4 of us. Scrambled back onto our boat like the devil himself was chasing us. I screamed at Daniels to get us moving. He already had the engines running. We pulled away from that station so fast we nearly capsized. Behind us, the men in their blood-stained aprons stood at the edge of the platform. watching, waving, that same smile on every white face. The fog swallowed the station in seconds. By the time we traveled 100 yards, there was nothing behind us but gray mist and open water. We radioed the Coast Guard, reported what we'd seen. They sent a helicopter, searched the coordinates for 6 hours, found nothing, no station, no platform, no men, just water, just fog, just the Bering Sea doing what it always does. They wrote it off as exhaustion, hallucination brought on by stress and the strange fog bank. But all four of us saw the same thing. All four of us smelled that death and ice smell. All four of us heard the man whisper about the great freeze coming. You don't hallucinate the same details across 4 different people. I did research when we got back to Dutch Harbor. Spent weeks in the library going through old records. Found references to a whaling station that operated out here in the 1880s. The Northern Star Whaling Company, based out of New Bedford but working the Bering Sea during the summer months. According to the records, the station disappeared in 1887. The entire platform, all 37 men, gone, vanished during a sudden cold snap that froze the surrounding waters solid in a matter of hours. When the ice finally broke up that spring, there was no trace of them. No wreckage, no bodies, nothing. The official report said they probably drifted south on an ice floe and broken up in the open ocean. But there were notes in the margins, written by the Coast Guard officer who led the search. He mentioned strange things. Whale oil lamps found floating in the water, still burning despite being submerged. Tools made of materials that didn't exist in 1887. And testimony from native hunters who claimed they'd seen the station. Still operating, still processing whales. Long after it should have sunk or broken apart, the native accounts were dismissed as superstition. But they were consistent. Every few decades, someone would report seeing the station, always in fog, always accompanied by that deathly cold. Always crewed by men with white skin who offered fresh blubber and spoke about the Great Freeze. And everyone who saw it reported the same thing. The men weren't hunting regular whales. They were hunting something else. Something that came from waters that didn't appear on any map. I found one account from 1952. A Coast Guard cutter investigating mysterious ice formations reported encountering the station. The officer in charge described it exactly as I'd seen it, down to the white-skinned men and the 2 wide smiles. But he added something I hadn't noticed in my panic to escape. The men's breath. When they spoke, no fog came from their mouths, no condensation despite the freezing temperature. They weren't breathing. Not like living men breathe. They were something else, something preserved, something kept going by forces that didn't follow normal rules. The 1952 report concluded with a warning. The officer wrote that the station was processing something from beyond the ice wall. That phrase again, the ice wall. He wrote that the creatures being harvested weren't from our oceans. They came from somewhere else. Somewhere accessible only when the conditions were right. When the fog was thick enough. When the cold was deep enough. When the barriers between waters broke down. He recommended that any future encounters with the station be avoided. That no one should board. That no one should accept the offered blubber or engage with the men in any way. The report was classified, filed away, forgotten, until I found it buried in archives that hadn't been digitized yet. Since that day in March, they've been tracking the sightings, collecting reports, talking to other fishermen who've seen things they can explain. The station appears roughly every 7 years, always in the same general area, always during unusual weather, always accompanied by that dead and ice smell. And the men are always there, still working, still processing, still preparing for the Great Freeze they keep mentioning. I've tried to understand what that means. The Great Freeze, at first I thought it was just historical. Maybe they died during a flash freeze and somehow got trapped, preserved in time. But the more reports I read, the more I think it is something else, something future. They were not trapped in 1887. They were preparing for something that hasn't happened yet. Something they saw coming. Something they've been working toward for over a century. The creatures they harvest. Those things that aren't quite whales. I've found references to them in old Inuit legends. They recalled by different names in different dialects, but the meaning is the same. The cold ones, the things that swim between waters. The heralds of the freeze. According to the legends, these creatures appear when the barriers between worlds thin. When the cold grows strong enough to crack reality. They swim through the gaps, carrying messages, warnings, promises, and the men at the whaling station. The ones with white skin and dark eyes? The ones who never breathe. They not harvesting the creatures to kill them. They reharvesting them to preserve them, to collect them, to store them in those crystalline pools that bubble in the iron kettles. They regathering an army, or a fleet, or a congregation, something that needs to be ready, something that needs to be available when the great freeze finally comes. I haven't been back to those waters. My crew refuses to fish anywhere near those coordinates. We stick to areas closer to shore now, safer areas, but I watch the weather reports obsessively. I track unusual fog banks. I monitor sea temperatures, and I notice something disturbing. The cold snaps are getting more frequent. The fog banks are lasting longer. The barriers are getting thinner. Last month, a Japanese fishing vessel reported an encounter with the station. Same white-skinned men, same offer of fresh blubber, same whispers about the great freeze. But this time, the men said something new. They said the harvest was nearly complete. They said the preparations were almost finished. They said the ice was coming soon. Not years, not decades, soon. They tried to warn people, contacted environmental agencies, maritime authorities, anyone who might listen. They all give me the same response. There's no evidence, no physical proof, just stories from spooked fishermen seeing things in the fog, just legends and superstitions from men who spend too long at sea, just exhaustion and hallucination and mass hysteria. But I know what I saw. I know what those men were. I know what they were harvesting from waters that shouldn't exist. And I know that when they say the great freeze is coming, they mean it. They've been preparing for over 100 years, collecting creatures from beyond the barriers, storing them in crystalline pools, building an army of things that swim between worlds, getting ready for the day when the cold finally wins, when the ice wall they keep mentioning finally breaks through, when their long harvest finally has purpose. The Bering Sea is changing. Every fisherman up here feels it. The ice forms differently now. The currents move in patterns that don't make sense. There are dead zones where nothing lives. Areas where the water temperature drops 40 degrees in a matter of minutes. Places where the fog rolls in and doesn't leave for days. And in those places, if you listen carefully, you can hear it. The sound of old machinery. The clank and hiss of steam engines from 1887. The whisper of men who never died. Men who are still working, still harvesting, still preparing. I am leaving Alaska, selling my boat, moving somewhere far from cold water and thick fog. Somewhere the ice can reach. Somewhere the barriers stay solid. But I know it won't matter. Not really. Because when the great freeze comes, when those white-skinned men finally finish their preparations, when the things they've been harvesting for over a century finally serve their purpose, there won't be anywhere safe. The cold will spread. The ice wall will advance. The waters will merge. And everything they've been collecting will come through. The Phantom Whaling Station ISN, to a ghost. It's a gate. A processing facility for things that swim between worlds. And the men who run it aren't dead. They rededicated. Committed to a cause that started in 1887 and won to end until their prophecy comes true. Until the great freeze finally arrives. Until the harvest is complete. I think about that tall man with the flensing knife. The way he smiled when he offered us fresh blubber. The way he looked at me with those dark pit eyes. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he could see my future. See all our futures. And in that future, there was ice. There was cold. There was the sound of old machinery working endlessly in the fog. There were creatures from beyond the barriers swimming through waters that had finally merged. And there were men with white skin and two wide smiles, still working. Still harvesting, still preparing. The distress signal wasn't a call for help. It was an invitation, a test. They wanted to see if we come, if we board their station, if we accept their offer. And by responding, by stepping onto that wooden deck, by looking into those processing buildings and seeing what they were really harvesting, we became part of it. Part of their story, part of their preparation. Because now we know. Now they've seen. Now we carry the knowledge of what is coming. And knowledge like that spreads, changes things, prepares the world in ways the white-skinned men need prepared. We not victims. We not witnesses. We heralds, carriers of the message, announcers of the great freeze. And when it comes, when the ice finally advances and the barriers finally break and those crystalline pools finally release what they've been storing for over a century, we'll remember. We'll recognize it. We know that the Phantom Whaling Station was never a ghost story or a legend or a hallucination. It was a warning, a preview, a glimpse of the cold future those men have been working toward since 1887. The fog is rolling in again. I can see it from my window, thick and gray and moving wrong, against the wind, toward me, and underneath the sound of the waves, I can hear it, faint but growing louder. The clank and hiss of old machinery, the whisper of men who never breathe, the promise of fresh blubber and the great freeze coming. They're still out there, still working, still harvesting, still preparing. And soon, very soon, their work will be complete. Story 10. Static Man. The figure standing at Pump Station 7 was made entirely of television static. And when I got within 50 feet of it, I remembered dying 3 years from now. My name is Carl Henderson. I am a pipeline technician for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. Been working the line since 1985. 4 years of routine maintenance, equipment checks, and long stretches of isolation in some of the most remote territory on Earth. They dealt with extreme cold, equipment failures, and the kind of loneliness that comes from spending weeks at unmanned stations with nothing but the hum of machinery for company. But nothing in my training prepared me for what started happening along the pipeline in the winter of 1989. It began with the radios. Small glitches at first, brief bursts of white noise interrupting communications between stations. We figured it was atmospheric interference, solar flares, the usual technical explanations for weird behavior in the Arctic. But the interference got worse, longer, more frequent, and it wasn't random. The static seemed to follow a pattern, moving from station to station along the pipeline route, south to north, like something was traveling. I was stationed at Pump 7, about 200 miles north of Fairbanks. Isolated. Just me and another tech named Morrison doing a 3-week rotation. The station is automated mostly. Our job was to monitor systems, perform maintenance, keep everything running smooth. On February 3rd, Morrison radioed that he was heading out to check a pressure sensor that had been giving weird readings. Standard procedure. He took the snowmobile about half a mile down the line. That was 2 p.m. By 4 p.m., he still hadn't come back. I tried raising him on the radio. Nothing but static, not the normal background hiss. This was different, layered, dense, like thousands of voices talking at once but too quiet to make out individual words. I grabbed my gear and headed out on the second snowmobile, following his tracks in the snow. I found his machine first, engine still running, parked next to an access panel on the pipeline. Morrison was standing about 20 yards away, facing away from me. Not moving, just standing there in the blowing snow, staring at something. I called out to him. He didn't respond. I got closer, maybe 30 feet away, and that's when I saw what he was looking at. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, human-shaped but wrong. Its entire form flickered and shifted like a television tuned to a dead channel. Gray and white static that moved in waves across its surface. No features, no face, just that endless visual noise formed into the rough outline of a man. And it was looking at Morrison. I couldn't see eyes, but I knew it was looking. Watching, studying. My radio erupted with white noise so loud I had to rip the earpiece out. The sound was physical. I could feel it in my chest, my teeth, my bones. Morrison still hadn't moved. I started toward him, but the moment I got within 10 feet of the static figure, my vision went white. Complete blindness, just searing white light flooding my eyes. And then the memories came. I was in a hospital room, Anchorage. 3 years from now, the date was clear in my mind. February 7th, 1992. I was lying in a bed, unable to move. Machines beeped around me. I could feel pain, terrible pain in my chest. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was dying. Heart attack, massive and sudden. I could feel my life ending. Could feel consciousness slipping away. Could feel the exact moment my heart stopped. Then I was back, standing in the snow, vision returning. The static figure was gone. Morrison was on his knees, hands over his face, making a sound like crying but wrong. Distorted, like audio breaking up. I pulled him to his feet and dragged him back to the snowmobile. He didn't resist. Didn't help. Just let me move him like a puppet. We got back to the station and I sealed us inside. Morrison wouldn't speak for 6 hours. Just sat in the corner, staring at nothing, occasionally making that broken crying sound. When he finally talked, his voice was hoarse and strange. He asked me if I'd seen it. The static man. That This is what he called it. The static man. I told him yes. He asked if I'd gotten close. If I'd gone blind. If I remembered things that haven't happened yet. That is when I knew I wasn't crazy. He experienced the same thing. He'd seen his own future. His own death. He told me what he'd seen. A plane crash. 2 years from now, he was flying home for Christmas. Engine failure over the Chugach Mountains. He remembered the moment of impact. Remembered dying. Remembered it with perfect clarity like it had already happened. We reported the incident, called it into headquarters, told them about the equipment malfunction, the strange readings, the vision problems. We didn't mention the static man. Didn't mention the impossible memories. They've pulled us out for psychological evaluation. Ended our careers. So we kept that part quiet. But we both knew what we'd seen. Both knew what it meant. The static man appeared again 3 days later. Different location. Pump Station 5, 80 miles south. 2 workers there reported the same thing. Tall figure made a visual noise. Radios filling with static. Temporary blindness. And memories. One worker remembered drowning. The other remembered a car accident. Both deaths were years in the future. Both felt absolutely real. The pattern continued. The static man moving along the pipeline. Appearing at different stations. Always near compressor equipment. Always accompanied by that overwhelming radio interference. And everyone who got close experienced the same thing. Blindness. Memories of their own deaths. Perfect, undeniable visions of how and when they would die. Management started noticing. Too many workers requesting transfers. Too many reports of equipment malfunctions. Too many incidents of temporary vision loss. They sent investigators. Brought in engineers to check for electrical problems. Tested for gas leaks, radiation, anything that might explain the hallucinations. They found nothing. The equipment was fine. The pipeline was operating normally. There was no physical explanation. But the sightings continued. By March, almost 20 workers had encountered the static man. All reported the same description. All experienced the blindness. All came away with memories of deaths that hadn't happened yet. And those memories were destroying people. How do you live normally when you know exactly how you were going to die? When they felt it. When it's more real than any regular memory. Morrison started drinking heavily. Said he couldn't sleep. Said every time he closed his eyes he was back in that plane. Feeling it fall. Feeling the impact. He knew the date. February 19th, 1991. He had almost 2 years to wait for his death. 2 years of knowing. 2 years of that memory playing over and over. He quit in April. Moved back to the lower 48. I heard he wrapped his car around a tree in Oregon 6 months later. Drunk. Couldn't handle carrying that future death in his head. I kept working. Kept my mouth shut. Kept my memory of that hospital room buried as deep as I could. But it was always there. Waiting. I knew the date. February 7th, 1992. I knew the location. Anchorage Regional Hospital. Room 347. I knew the cause. Myocardial infarction. Massive. Fatal. I felt it. Felt my heart explode. Felt everything stop. And I couldn't unknow it. The static man appeared to me again in July. I was doing a solo check at Pump Station 9. It was standing right in the middle of the access road. Waiting. Like it knew I was coming. I stopped the truck 50 yards away. Grabbed binoculars. Tried to see details. But there were no details. Just that endlessly shifting gray and white noise. Just the shape of a man made from absence of signal. From the space between stations. From the void where information should be but ISNT. I knew I should turn around. Drive away. But something pulled me forward. Like the static man was calling. Broadcasting on a frequency only I could hear. I got out of the truck. Started walking toward it. Every step made the static in my head louder. My radio screamed white noise. And then I was blind again. White light. Complete sensory overload. And a new memory flooded in. I was in my apartment in Fairbanks. 6 months from now, January 1990, I was loading a gun. My service pistol, the one I kept for protection in the remote stations. I could feel the weight of it, the cold metal, and I knew, with horrible certainty, what I was about to do. The despair, the hopelessness, the memory of my future death driving me to create a different one. To take control, to end it on my terms instead of waiting for that hospital room in 1992. Then I was back, lying in the snow. The static man was gone. My nose was bleeding. My head felt like it had been split open. And I had 2 death memories now. One in 1992 from a heart attack. One in 1990 from suicide. 2 futures. 2 endings. Both feeling equally real. Both inevitable. That is when I understood. The static man wasn't showing us our deaths. It was showing us possibilities, futures that could happen, timelines branching off from every decision, every choice. It wasn't broadcasting from our future. It was broadcasting from somewhere outside time entirely, from a place where all possibilities exist simultaneously. And getting too close to it meant downloading those possibilities into our brains. Memories of things that might happen, things that could happen, things that will happen unless we change course. But here, it's the horror of it. Once you remember dying, once you feel it, once it is as real as any memory you have, it becomes part of you. It influences your decisions, changes your behavior, and maybe, just maybe, it makes that future more likely. Creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. You remember dying in a plane crash, so you become nervous around planes, so you drink before a flight, so you cause a disturbance, so you get on a different plane, so you end up on the one that crashes. The static man wasn't predicting our futures. It was creating them, broadcasting possible deaths until we made them real by trying to avoid them. By letting the knowledge poison our present. By carrying those memories until they became destiny. I started researching, found reports going back to the early days of the pipeline. Workers seeing strange figures near the compressor stations. Reports of visions, prophetic dreams, mental breakdowns, high suicide rates among pipeline workers in certain areas, all clustered around the same locations where the static man appeared. There were theories. Some workers believed it was some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. The massive electrical systems in the compressor stations creating fields that affected human brains. Others thought it was psychological, isolation and stress causing shared hallucinations. But I knew better. I'd seen it, felt it. The static man was real, and it wasn't random atmospheric interference. It was something else, something that existed in the spaces between stations, between channels, between moments, a thing made of signal noise, a broadcast from outside normal reality. More workers encountered it through the fall. The company started mandatory psychological evaluations. Anyone reporting visions or hallucinations was immediately pulled from duty. But that just made people stop reporting, keep their encounters secret, carry their death memories alone. The suicide rate spiked. 3 workers killed themselves in October, 2 more in November. All of them had reported seeing the static man in unofficial conversations. All of them had gotten close. All of them had remembered their deaths. I became obsessed with preventing mine. The heart attack. February 7th, 1992. I started exercising, changed my diet, quit smoking, had regular checkups. My doctor said my heart was fine, strong, no signs of problems. But I knew what I felt, knew that pain, knew that sudden catastrophic failure. And I couldn't shake the feeling that trying to prevent it was somehow causing it. That every step I took to avoid that future was actually a step toward it. The static man appeared less frequently after the first year. Sightings dropped off. The radio interference became rare. Some workers thought it had moved on. Others believed it had never been there at all. Just mass hysteria, shared delusion. But I knew it was still out there, still broadcasting, still showing people their possible ends, still creating futures by revealing them. I am writing this in January 1990, 1 month before my second death memory, the suicide. I've been watching myself, monitoring my mental state. I'm not depressed. I am not hopeless. I don't want to die. But I have that memory, clear as day, me loading that gun. Me making that decision, and I'm terrified that when February comes, I'll suddenly understand why. That circumstances will align in a way I can to predict. That the future I saw will become inevitable. And if I survive February, I have 2 more years until the heart attack. 2 more years of knowing. 2 more years of carrying that death in my head. 2 more years of wondering if trying to prevent it is actually causing it. 2 more years of being trapped by a memory of something that hasn't happened yet but feels more real than anything in my past. That's what the static man does. It doesn't kill you. It traps you in possible futures. Makes you live your death over and over before it happens. Poisons your present with visions of your end. And maybe, just maybe, those visions become self-fulfilling. Maybe by showing us how we die, it ensures we die that way. Maybe it's not predicting futures. Maybe it's writing them, broadcasting them into our minds until we make them real. I still see it sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, standing near compressor stations, made of gray and white noise, watching, waiting, broadcasting, and every time I see it, I wonder whose death it is showing now, whose future it is poisoning, whose present it is trapping in memories of an ending they can to escape. The static man is still out there on the pipeline, still appearing when conditions are right, still offering visions to anyone who gets too close. And those visions are worse than any death. Because death, when it comes, is over quickly. But carrying the memory of your death, living with that knowledge, feeling it every day, that is the real horror. That it's the thing that destroys you long before your actual end. I don't know if I'll die in February or in 1992 or some other way entirely. But I know the static man showed me possibilities. And I know that knowing them has changed me, made me different, made me afraid in ways I never was before. And maybe that fear is enough. Maybe that change is enough. Maybe the static man doesn't need to kill us. It just needs to show us our deaths and let that knowledge do the work. Let us destroy ourselves trying to avoid the inevitable. Let us make those futures real by believing they refixed. The static is always there now. In every radio, every television, every electronic hiss and pop. And I wonder if the static man is still broadcasting, still showing people their ends, still trapping them in futures they can to escape, still standing at pump stations and compressor facilities, still waiting for someone to get close enough to see, close enough to remember, close enough to carry death as a memory instead of an event. And that might be the worst fate of all.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in a world that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.